Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Understanding 501c3 Tax Exemption Webinar. My name is Efat Walker, and I will be your host. I am the Managing Partner and Senior Consultant for Walker Associates Consulting. We are a full-service accounting, tax, and business consulting firm centrally located in Conyers, Georgia. This presentation consists of a total of 34 slides. This meeting is currently in listen-only mode. I will present all 34 slides, then I will unmute for questions and answers from the attendees. Please limit all questions and comments to only those questions of a general nature that relate directly to the content in which has been covered during this session. For any questions that you may have that relate directly to your nonprofit organization, please feel free to give us a call at 678-374-9408. We would love to offer you a free 20-minute phone consultation. Okay, let's get started. After this webinar, you should be able to gain a general understanding of the IRS 501c3 status, explain the difference between nonprofit and tax-exempt status, understand the requirements needed prior to applying for the 501c3 status, list the parts of the organizational and operational test required for 501c3 status, and distinguish between private foundations and public charity status. I've listed the types of tax-exempt organizations to give you a general overview on the variety in tax-exempt organizations. The type for the purposes of this presentation, of course, are 501c3 organizations. Included in a 501c3 organizations, the type of tax-exempt organizations include charitable, religious, and educational organizations. In a 501c4, it includes civic leagues and social welfare organizations. 501c5, labor, agricultural, horticultural organizations. 501c6, business and professional leagues. 501c7, social and recreational clubs. 501c8, fraternal beneficiary societies. 501c19, that includes veterans organizations. 501c3, to be tax exempt under Section 501c3, the Internal Revenue Code, an organization must be organized and operated exclusively for exempt purposes set forth in Section 501c3, and none of its earnings may inure to any private shareholder or individual. In addition, it may not be an action organization. The organization must also file IRS Form 1023 to apply for tax exemption. What are some of the benefits of tax exemption? I've listed some of the most common benefits of becoming a tax-exempt nonprofit organization. Those include reduced postal rates, possible exemption from state income, sales, and employment taxes, tax-deductible contributions, and exemption from federal income tax. Organization eligibility. The Internal Revenue Code lists the types of organizations that are eligible for tax-exempt status. Those include trust, unincorporated associations, and nonprofit corporations. Your organization must have organizing documents. Regardless to the type of organization you qualify as, under the Internal Revenue Code, in order to meet the organizing requirements, your organization must have organizing documents prior to applying for tax exemption under IRS 501c3. Organizing documents include a corporate charter, articles of incorporation, articles of association, a trust instrument, or some other written instrument by which the organization is created under state law. Regardless to the type of document used, these documents are created under state law and not federal law. Other requirements. In addition to your organizing documents, nonprofit organizations should also have bylaws, an employer identification number, They should also be registered as a charitable organization and also have written governance. Bylaws. Let's talk about bylaws. In most cases, your organization should have bylaws. Your organization's bylaws should outline the organization's internal operating rules. Let's take, for example, the PTA program at your local school. Your PTA program, in a lot of cases, are 501c3 organizations. Some are not, but in most cases, they are 501c3s. In order for your PTA to run effectively, there is a document called the bylaws. The bylaws basically outline the responsibilities of each officer, the time that each officer has in office, whether it's a full school year, 2 years, what the membership fee is for each member, what the quorum is for a meeting. Those are the types of things that your bylaws will have in them, and it will also pretty much keep the order in your organization. Although federal tax law does not require specific language in the bylaws of most organizations, it is really best practice. It is best practice to have bylaws. That's more of a state requirement per se, but in best practice, if you want a good outcome and you want participation and you want order in your nonprofit organization, it is best to have bylaws. The employer identification number. Every organization must have an employer identification number. This is also referred to as an EIN. Even if it will not have employees, it still needs to have an EIN. Your EIN is a unique number that identifies your organization to the IRS. We actually provide this service to our clients for free. Charitable organization registration. For those organizations that wish to solicit for funds, most states require that you register as a charitable organization. Now, this registration is different from the IRS Form 1023, as it is a state registration requirement for soliciting and not a federal requirement for soliciting. Again, this is not the same thing as registering your organization as a corporation. It's an entirely different registration, and in most cases, in most states, this registration takes place via the Secretary of State's office. Before you begin soliciting for any contributions, any donations, you see a lot of Little League teams on the side of the road with their buckets, and they're asking for $1 or $2. They are required to register as a charitable organization with the state before they go out and begin to solicit for funding for any type of donations. When you do so, you are going to be required to adhere to additional requirements when fundraising activities involve paid solicitors and fundraising counsel. Governance. An organization is more likely to operate effectively and consistently with tax law requirements if it clearly articulates its purpose. That includes the mission and the vision statements. Your mission and vision should be a clear articulation of the organization's purpose. It shouldn't be vague. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't leave a question as to what it is you want to do and why you want to do it and who you want to do it for. It should be clear. It also has a knowledgeable and committed governing body and management team. That means your board of directors and your management. These are the people that should be knowledgeable about the organization, and they're going to provide great governance and guidance to the organization based upon Those things that we talked about prior. It's, they're going to work within the bylaws of the organization. Has sound management practices. Those are your written policies and procedures. Your board of directors actually works in conjunction with management. They actually write up your written policies and procedures. That's a part of their job, is to work on putting together a working set of policies and procedures for your organization. Organizational and operational tests. These organizations must also meet two tests: the organizational test and the operational test. We will discuss both tests in further detail shortly. Nonprofit versus tax exempt. The terms nonprofit and tax exempt are not synonymous. Nonprofit status is determined by state law, which governs organizing documents, whereas tax exempt status is governed by federal law. Thus, all tax exempt organizations are nonprofit, but not all nonprofits are necessarily tax exempt. I want to make sure you got that. I'm going to say it one more time. Nonprofit status is determined by state law, which governs organizing documents. Those organizing documents are, again, your articles of incorporation. Those are the things we talked about earlier. Tax exempt status is governed by federal law. Thus, all tax exempt organizations are nonprofit, but not all nonprofits are necessarily tax exempt. What are the purposes of 501c3s? In order to even qualify for as a 501c3, you have to fit into one of the purposes that we're going to discuss. Are you a charitable organization? Are you an educational organization? Are you a religious organization? What about a scientific organization? A literary organization? Are you testing for public safety? Are you fostering national or international amateur sports competition? Or are you preventing cruelty to children or animals? You have to fit in one of these purposes in order to qualify to be considered a 501c3. Now, for the purpose of this webinar, we're going to focus specifically on the top three. Those include charitable organizations, educational organizations, and religious organizations. Entities for a charitable purpose include those that promote relief of the poor, the distressed, or the underprivileged, lessening of neighborhood tensions, and defense of human and civil rights secured by law. Entities organized for a religious purpose include churches, synagogues, mosque, and other religious organizations. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. Again, entities that are organized for a religious purpose. I mean, that's the key word, religious purpose. That's going to be a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or, and other religious organizations. Entities organized for an educational purpose. Again, another key word, educational purpose. We're talking about schools, we're talking about museums, symphony orchestras, daycare centers, and youth sports organizations. These are entities that are organized for an educational purpose. The IRS has a two-part test. Now that we understand some basics about tax-exempt organizations and have looked at the common types of 501c3 organizations, let's take a look and talk about those two tests that I mentioned before. The organizational and the operational test. Organizational test. The entity must be properly managed, properly organized. What does that mean? We talked about the organization. We talked about being a corporation, being a trust. You have to be properly organized. While the entity may be a nonprofit corporation, trust, or unincorporated association under state law, its organizing documents must limit its purposes to one or more of the exempt purposes listed in Code Section 501c3 and not permit the organization to engage in a non-exempt activity. Further, assets of the organization must be permanently dedicated to an exempt purpose. The operational test. The organization must show that it will engage primarily in activities that further its exempt purpose. This means that the entity must limit its participation in certain activities while absolutely refraining from others. Failure to do so will put the organization's 501c3 status in jeopardy. Public charity or private foundation. When an entity qualifies as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, the IRS presumes it is a private foundation unless the 501c3 can show that it's a public charity. The code automatically classifies some types of organizations. Those organizations are shown on the next slide as public charities, commonly referred to as statutory public charity. Statutory public charities are churches, schools, organizations providing medical or hospital care, including medical education and research. Other public charities. Organizations that receive significant public support or organizations that provide support to other public charities. Public charity versus foundation. Generally, organizations that are classified as public charities are those that, number one, are churches, hospitals, qualified medical organizations affiliated with hospitals, schools, colleges, and universities. 2, have an active program of fundraising and receive contributions from many sources, including the general public, governmental agencies, corporations, private foundations, or other public charities. 3, receive income from the conduct of activities in the furtherance of the organization's exempt purposes. Or 4, actively function in a supporting relationship to one or more existing public charities. Private foundations. Typically, private foundations have a single major source of funding, usually gifts from one family or corporation rather than funding from many sources, and most have as their primary activity the making of grants to other charitable organizations and to individuals rather than the direct operation of the charitable programs. One of the top foundations that I found and that I think of often when I think of a foundation is the Arthur Blank Foundation. Of course, I do live in the Atlanta area, and the Arthur Blank Foundation is, in my opinion, an awesome example of a foundation and what a foundation is capable of doing for many different organizations. Again, check out their website if time allows. The Arthur Blank Foundation. It's a great, the Arthur Blank Foundation. It's a wonderful foundation based out of Atlanta, Georgia, that provides just some great resources for the community. How to show your organization is a public charity. If your organization is not a public charity defined by statute, it may still be a public charity if it receives broad public support. The organization must demonstrate that it receives a substantial part of its support in the form of contributions from publicly supported organizations, government units, and or the general public, or normally receives no more than 1/3 of its support from gross investment income combined and gets more than 1/3 of its support from contributions, membership fees, and gross receipts from activities related to its exempt functions. Proving public support. If your new 501c3 can show that it can reasonably be expected to be publicly supported, it will be treated as a public charity for its first 5 years, regardless of how much public support it actually received. Take, for example, you're a brand new organization. You've not received any kind of contributions, no donations, nothing. You've not been out soliciting for funds. But you know that you have that you're going to get the majority of your support from the public. And how can you prove that? Again, the IRS specifically states that if your new 501c3 can show that it can reasonably be expected to be publicly supported, it will be treated as a public charity for its first 5 years. That's why your financial projections are so important when it comes to completing your IRS Form 1023 for tax exemption. That section is extremely important. It's going to show, well, it should show in your projections where you're getting the funding from. Where's it coming from? What type of activities are you going to host? Are they going to be fundraisers? Are they going to be, are you going to be out on the side of the road with a bucket? I mean, how does it happen? Those are the kinds of things that you have to outline. How often are you going to do this? That's why it's so important that your application is complete. Not only that it is complete, but that it makes sense, that it tells a story, and that the reader can understand and can visualize exactly what you have in mind. Again, that it's pretty important in your financial section of the actual application. After the first 5 years, beginning with the organization's 6th year, the IRS will monitor your public charity status. You have to show that you meet one of the public support tests over a 5-year computation period of the current year and the 4 preceding years. If so, your organization will remain in public charity for that year and the next tax year. Time for questions and answers. I hope I've, provided a lot of information for you that you can take and that you can pretty much run with. But now I'm going to open it up for questions and answers. Thank you for attending today's webinar on understanding IRS 501c3 tax exemption. I'd like to take this time to offer the services of Walker & Associates Consulting. We can assist you in the following. We can assist you in incorporating your nonprofit organization and obtaining your EIN number and licensing. We can assist you in applying for IRS tax exemption. We can provide board development training for you and your organization. Policies and procedures development, as well as nonprofit tax reporting and preparation. We'd love to provide you with a free 20-minute phone consultation. If you'd give us a call at 678-374-9408, we'd love to schedule that for you. In addition, please feel free to visit our website at www.wacaccountingandtax.com. Feel free to also shoot us an email at info@wacaccountingandtax.com. Next week's webinar is going to be on jeopardizing tax-exempt status. Please tune in Tuesday, August 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Tuesday.